Successful meetings and ultimately successful collaborations are about people, first and foremost. When you can't have everybody in the same room with you, it's important to be able to see them, to be able to interact with them, along with the information that you're working on. The only way that we could make it happen every day is to use GoToMeeting.
I'm Michael Parrish Dudell, entrepreneur, speaker, and best-selling author of Shark Tank Jumpstart Your Business. This is a show about discovery, about showcasing the next generation of business and media influencers. It's new, it's now, it's the next crop. Hi everyone, welcome to The Next Crop. I'm Michael Parrish Dudell. My guest today is Shane Snow, a tech journalist and the co-founder and chief creative officer of Contently, a platform that helps brands create, maintain, and optimize content. Shane, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, so I just gave your intro and it's like creating and maintaining and optimizing. That's a lot of big words about content that maybe people don't understand. Tell me a little bit more about what Contently actually does.
Contently is actually solving two problems. One is that journalists and creative people over the last couple of decades have become increasingly less tethered to workplace. They're more and more freelancers. And because of that, there are all these challenges that basically the two main things that you have to do that have nothing to do with the craft, if you're a freelancer, are finding work and getting your work to pay you. And so that's one problem. The other problem is that now because of social media, more and more companies want to talk to consumers directly, and they need basically what publishing company, they're considering themselves publishers, they need the things that publishing companies have had for generations, which are tools and talent. So Contently is helping to provide work and the means to get paid to freelance journalists, while at the same time offering those freelance journalists to brands that want talent to be able to tell stories.
It's a marketplace for journalists. Yeah,
That's
and you hear it all the time, and you just said it. Content is so important. You know, brands, businesses, every thought leaders, anyone in this space, they're thinking about content. But a lot of times people don't actually understand the why, besides you should just have it. So from somebody who's on this side and from somebody who really understands content, why do you think it's so important that businesses and brands really become content providers?
Well, since the beginning of commerce, businesses have been trying to do one thing primarily, and that's build relationships with customers so that they can sell them things, so that they can come back. And it turns out that telling stories has been, throughout history, the tried and true way to build relationships with anyone. Think about your relationship with your country or your family or your friends. It's all built on getting together and telling stories. And so brands now have this opportunity to tell stories because they now have the pipes, basically, because of the internet, to actually directly talk one-on-one with people. And because that's such a powerful way to build relationships, that's why they want to invest in stories.
Do you find like it's hard for a brand to honestly and authentically tell their story? Because I know from both sides there's a struggle. From a consumer side, you don't actually look at a brand and say, oh, I'm going to automatically trust that you're telling my story. And from a brand side, you have to be careful because there's a lot of shareholders, there's a lot of people that you represent. Is there a struggle? Are the people really receptive to the story that brands are telling today?
There's totally a struggle.
Yeah.
Everyone is terrible at it, or a lot of people are terrible at it. If you think about it, a brand is, they're a commercial company, so are all of the media companies, right, that we're used to, or most of them, right? We've learned to trust the New York Times, even though the New York Times has a profit incentive. They want to sell advertisements. We learn to trust them because they consistently tell us true stories, because they don't betray our trust. I think if brands behave in their communications in the same way, like they want to build trust, and the consumer experience and the sort of lack of betrayal, I guess, is number one, they're going to be able to develop that kind of relationship. But the problem is you have people in marketing departments that are very used to the direct marketing, direct sales, where's the plug, where's the product placement, and those little things can sort of be the little moments of sort of betrayals or micro betrayals that make people think, there's an incentive here, they're not really after my best interest, so it's harder to build that sort of credibility.
So I think that something that you just sort of spoke to, and perhaps it's dangerous. I feel like more than ever now, businesses and media are coming together. They're reaching sort of an access place where one's influencing the other's influencing, and we're at a place where, when I'm online, I'm not really sure if I'm reading something that's brought to you by a brand or if I'm reading something that's actually real journalism. Is this dangerous? Are we at a place where media and integrity is being jeopardized because of this branded content?
I think there's definitely a danger. I'm pretty optimistic. For a couple of reasons. One, because we're so hyper-connected because of social media and everything that the internet has given us, it is very easy for bad news to spread. So if you're a brand and you're a bad actor and you do something that is sketchy or betrays the trust of the audience, it's very easy for the pitchforks to come out on Twitter. And you've seen, these things metastasize where like a small thing gets blown up. So brands have a huge disincentive to act poorly. So I think that I don't want to say that there's an invisible hand of the internet that will cause everyone to behave nicely, because clearly that hasn't happened. But for big companies, for big brands that have the big budgets to tell the big stories, I think there is a big incentive. I think about journalism with the capital J, and then I think about information and education and entertainment, which the latter is really what brands are trying to get into. As Patagonia, I'm not interested in sponsoring the story about the orphanage fire, or the war in Afghanistan, or covering sort of keeping the government honest and all of that. I'm interested in telling the stories about mountain climbing. And so I think there's a place for both. What I actually worry about is that journalism with the capital J has always been subsidized by the advertising and by the brands themselves. And so what happens as there's less incentive to work with the media companies and just do the information entertainment yourselves, what funds the real stuff?
So I think one of the ways that brands can either be clever or maybe a little scandalous and a little controversial is through native advertising, which seems to be sort of the new big thing. And I'm going to let you define sort of what native advertising is. But how do you think that native advertising is changing the landscape for media and for brands?
Yeah, so it's all the buzz right now. Native advertising is typically defined as an advertisement that fits the medium seamlessly without kind of an interruption. So if you think about banner ads on the internet, that's not a seamless experience or a pop-up, right? You're being interrupted from the thing you want. But if you think about Google ads, the thing you want is a search result. The ad actually is a search result too. So that's more of a native experience. So on publications, the native advertising people are usually talking about is actually that this ad is a story, not some offer or landing page or coupon or whatever. So the danger here is if, as a consumer, you think that the story is brought to you by the New York Times, but is actually brought to you by Michael Dudell, saying about how great Michael Dudell is and how great his ties are, and how you should buy them. And
keep going. No, I like where this conversation's going. Yeah.
If you think that the New York Times is telling you that, that's huge. But if it turns out that actually Michael's telling you that in third person, it's kind of obnoxious and
But
weird.
if the New York Times would like to say that, I'm open to that idea as well, as long as it's really the New York Times and not me. Okay, so native advertising, you can go one way or the other. It can be really effective, can also be really dangerous, and if it is dangerous and people recognize it as a fake, social, it's going to blow up. It's not good for the business.
Right.
So they have to figure out how to walk a line.
Right.
You talked about the value of storytelling for businesses and brands. Let's talk about the value of storytelling for individuals, which leads me to your book. That's really where I want to go. So you just finished a book.
Yes.
It's coming out when?
September 9th.
September 9th. Tell me all about what the book's about, your process, and sort of the story you tell in that book.
Sure. So I started out with a question. I was here in New York, new to New York, had been covering technology startups and entrepreneurship, was inspired to start my own company, and sort of looking around saw there are people doing incredible things in implausibly short amounts of time. And the question was why and how, and why doesn't this happen in other industries? So in the course of sort of digging into that question, I decided to write a book about hackers throughout history. Kind of this idea of working smart and what are the patterns among the people and companies that can sort of pass sort of the rest, beat the norm by working smart, and often that's using technology. So the book kind of became this intellectual adventure story where I talk about the Cuban Revolution and bad US presidents and fast-growing tech startups and SpaceX and Jimmy Fallon and sort of this whole panoply of characters that ended up being really fun that I worked on it over the course of the last year and a half.
So working smart is interesting because I have a bone to pick with working smart. I think working smart is important, and you can tell me I'm wrong. Plenty of people do. I think working smart is important, but I think that as we try to work smarter, sometimes people forget that it's actually hard work, that it's actually sweat equity. And it's like going to the gym, right? Working smarter, at the very end, it's going to help sort of fix or tighten. But at the end of the day, you have to show up, you have to put the hours in. So tell me about how working hard and working smart relate to each other. And is something getting lost in this whole working smart idea?
Yeah, so this is one of my worries, actually, with this, the whole entrepreneurship and innovation and working smart sort of movement is that there is no sort of shortcut.
Yeah.
So the book that the title of the book is Smart Cuts, which is kind of a play on words, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't have to explain that.
Yeah.
But I see shortcuts as something that's short-term and not sustainable. What's the difference between a shortcut and sort of a hack that actually ends up being sustainable, and often it's the preparation that goes behind it. So I actually went into the book thinking that I would debunk Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hour rule, and I came out of the book realizing that it's actually pretty accurate, that most people that do these incredible things have been spending decades thinking about them or working on them or trying and failing before they get to it. And so, I think I'm convinced that working smart is not enough, but working hard is not enough either. And actually that, just working hard, doing the same thing, pounding the nail harder and harder is the dumb way to work.
Yeah.
That the smart way is figuring out how to amplify the hard work that you're doing.
I like that. So it's about amplification. It's not about subtracting hours, or it's about figuring out how to use those hours in the best way.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's smart. So I want to call out some brands here. I want to get your opinion, and you can use Contently brands or you can choose not to. I want to get your opinion on who you think right now is doing it right and who's doing it, maybe you don't have to say who's doing it wrong, but where there's room for improvement. So what are the brands we should be looking to sort of be examples of great sort of content and content marketing?
So obviously I'd love to talk about some of our customers. I think American Express for years has been leading the way in branded content. We did a series recently on the best of branded content 2014 so far. A couple of ones that I really liked are Net-a-Porter. They have a new magazine called Porter that is going to kill Vogue, I think.
Wow, big words.
Yeah, I think it's if you look at it, you'll understand. It's a fashion magazine. It's full page, full color, and it's awesome. And they are the primary. I mean, they're selling advertising in it, but they are going to make way more money from that magazine than they would advertising in Vogue. And
Sure.
the production value is really high. Also, one that I really like. It's not nonfiction. It's not more editorial, but it's the Lego Movie. Recently, what piece of branded content made more than $200 million, in
That's
history?
true, yeah.
And we all knew that it was a big advertisement for Lego, but they were very upfront about what it was, and it was highly entertaining. They had great, actors and great production value.
Yeah.
So I think there's lessons to be learned from that. If you treat it like you would if you were trying to compete with, real content, right, and not just with advertising. I think those are great lessons. The bad, I think, are when you see sponsored content that is trying to imitate what was cool 6 months ago.
Yeah.
So you see these BuzzFeed listicles by some brands that are just really obnoxiously bad. Or I saw a BuzzFeed quiz that a brand had put out that was just a ripoff of a BuzzFeed quiz, but it was about some B2B thing that wasn't interesting.
Yeah.
Those things flop.
Well, that's really interesting because I think at the core of that, it's about authenticity. I don't care if it's something from 5 years ago. If it doesn't feel authentic to your brand, I don't really relate to it. I don't understand it. It doesn't fit in sort of the world that I see your brand in. Tell me about how authenticity can play a role in creating content, because that's a big idea, and you hear it all, authenticity. Mm-hmm. I don't really know what that means. So how does a brand think about content authentically to who they are?
How do they?
Yeah.
Or how should they, I guess?
You have 2 minutes to answer that
Yeah.
question. How should they? How do you approach content from an authentic place?
I think you should approach it like it were a documentary. You should not approach it like it's some sort of a press release or a PR play. I think a great example of this was Ford when they were in trouble a few years ago. Everyone kind of hated them and their cars sucked. They did this documentary series called Bold Moves where they went inside of the Ford factories with the cameras to show warts and all, here are all the problems and here are the hardworking people that are trying to solve them. And they didn't sculpt it into this thing that was beautiful and perfect because people wouldn't have believed it. They showed you here is the crap we're dealing with and here's what we screwed up and here's why it's wrong, but also here's what we believe. And so I think taking that, people want reality right now. Reality TV, it's not reality, but Twitter is sort of this live streaming thing that that is huge. Everyone is trying to, I guess, sort of capture and repurpose reality. I think brands have an opportunity to not sculpt reality, but to show the real thing. I saw a billboard for American Eagle that was these models have not been photoshopped.
Yeah.
And it's hilarious that they have to say that, but I think they got a lot of good burn for that. If you're thinking let's not Photoshop the models when we tell the stories about our brand, That is how you get authenticity.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for being here. My guest today has been Shane Snow. You can find out all about Contently at, of course, contently.com. You can also follow Shane on Twitter at Shane Snow. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you visit thenextcrop.com/more, where you can get 5 more minutes of this episode totally for free. We're going to be talking about what you need to do if you're an individual or a business to produce great content. It's going to be a lot of fun. Again, that's only on thenextcrop.com/more. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.